Hello, welcome to the Morrissey Metcalfe Podcast, where we interview cool and interesting people with your host, Len Morrissey. In today's episode, we talk with Keith Costello, a U.S. Army veteran, father of four, and co-founder and CEO of Locality Bank. So Keith, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. Can you hear me okay? Everything good?
Yeah. Good to be here. Thank you.
Oh, thanks for coming. So Keith, tell me a little bit about yourself, your background. And before you start, I did want to say that I reviewed your video on your locality website, and it talked about you. And I'm looking at some of my notes here. Keith, Corey, and Drew sort of was about your stories, and it really resonated with me because when I talk to anybody who will listen to me, customers or partners or whatever it might be, any kind of stakeholders, the first thing I say is typically, I'm a recovering banker. And I was in banking for 17 plus years, and 10 years ago I left it and became ran a manufacturing company, and now I started up a few companies on my own. And you didn't really have that necessarily those words, but it felt very similar to yours and Corey's and Drew's story, and I thought that was really kind of interesting. So tell me about your life, where you are, and your story in banking.
Sure. So thanks first, Len, for having me on. And so I guess we were just talking about where you are today. You're in Buffalo, New York. So that's where I started out, was in upstate New York, Albany, New York, and grew up there, spent a lot of hard winters up there, and wanted to leave because of the hardship
Do not blame you, my friend.
of that area. And during one of so I started out in college up there, but then made a trip down here during spring break, and I'm like, I'm going to Florida. And so I applied for an Army, or I had an Army ROTC scholarship. So I just looked into transferring to any school in Florida that had ROTC, so I could have my school paid for. And I ended up at University of Tampa, and I came down there, and so that was in the late 70s.
Okay.
And came to Tampa, went right into the military out of college. 80, Ronald Reagan's president. I ended up as a second lieutenant in the Army.
Wow.
And as I tell my son now, who's 21, who looks to me for advice about what to do when he gets out of school, I'm telling him, hey, I'm just glad I had a job, when I graduated. I knew what I was doing. I didn't have to sit there and think about it. But that was an interesting time in the country. Reagan was such a great leader. No matter what your politics are, the guy was very charismatic, and just a really, I look at that time in our history as a great time for the United States, and a great time also to be in the military, because he really built up the military at that time after kind of a sad time after Vietnam, and a lot of our service members coming home and being mistreated, and there was a malaise really about the military. So really liked that period of time. Got out of the military in 1985, had a real impact on me as a person.
Yeah.
I came right back to Florida, to Fort Lauderdale. And so really, more or less, Len, I've been here at Fort Lauderdale since 1985. So I really feel like this is home to me.
Yeah.
More so, I've spent way more time here than I have in Albany.
Yeah, it's been a long time, right?
Yeah, been here quite a while. I mean, my kids have grown up here. We've really made this our home.
Excellent.
So didn't start out in banking. I got out of the military. I had run clubs in the military, of all things, officer and NCO clubs. So I ended up in the restaurant business right out of, that was really what I wanted to do, was be in the restaurant business.
Oh, wow.
Got married shortly after that, and then it was like, you know what, this is not going to work out with being married. And
it's a tough business to manage and run, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was coming home at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. So anyway, that got me into some other, I ended up working at Merrill Lynch as a broker, and then I ended up in 1990. That's when I entered the banking business, and I had met a gentleman who was an executive at what was then NCMB, which became Nations Bank, which became Bank of America.
Yep.
Really great guy, a real inspiration to me about banking. And that was one thing that I really resonated with me, and still does to this day, Len, about banking, is I really And I didn't have this feeling when I was a stockbroker.
Right.
It was a feeling that I was really helping people, and I was delivering a real value. And I was really, and I see you nodding because I know you're a banker, but I mean, that's something I think that you feel if you're in the banking business.
I totally agree. It's interesting because when I left banking, I don't want to make this about me, but when I left banking in 2011 and became the CFO of a manufacturing company, I have a Bachelor of Commerce degree. I don't even have an accounting degree, but I was really torn with the banking industry because I loved I mean, I calculated at one point I did 10,000 loans in my career because I started in mid 90s. And I struggled with the banking industry as a whole because of my personality. I'm a little bit more of I'm less risk adverse than typical bankers, which is one of the reasons why your video resonated, because that's kind of what you talked about a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so my ways of doing things and the way typical banking is sort of always sort of that we butt heads, I guess, right? So when I left, I was torn because my favorite part was really helping the customers. And that's cliche, but it's true, because you actually do directly impact every single company you touch. And that is what got me back into it. So I completely understand what you're saying. And it's what, like I said, why I started this company up a few years ago.
Yeah. I mean, that is really what drew me and what I really loved about banking all along. To your point, so I was always a bit entrepreneurial. And so I never had envisioned myself going into banking and ended up in it. And found out I did like it. And then the interest, I started out in a big bank, very great to get an education.
Right.
But then also what I realized was the difference between working in a large bank and working in a community bank. And
very, very different.
Yeah, very big difference. And so that level of being able to work with and help local companies really I became even more passionate about the business once I got into a community bank. Yeah. And so after working in and learning community banking, it was 2009 when really 2007, I guess I left the bank I was working at, and that was June of 2007. And I remember that very clearly because that was a jump for me, because I had a nice job and I had a lot of obligations, like a lot of us do at that stage of life. I mean, I think I was 50 and I had 4 kids and 2 ex-wives, so I had accumulated some obligations along the way.
Yep.
And so to take that risk, I guess, and left my job, and then we go to open this bank, and it's 2008 all of a sudden as we're raising money, and the whole banking industry.
Oh wow!
Oh yeah, the banks are failing, and we're out there trying to raise $12.5 million to start a bank, and people are just, the people that I had talked to initially were not picking up the phone anymore.
No, they're getting cold feet. Yeah.
Yeah. So it became really just a mission of urgency, because I remember the rest of the organizers were all like, "Well, I guess we're not going to raise the money." I said, "No, that's not an option for me, guys. Right. This is what I do for a living. This is how I make my money. I'm going to be, I'll be out on the streets if we don't get this bank done." Right. And plus, no other banks are hiring in 2000.
No, they're not. They're letting people go.
Yeah. I'm like, we got to get this thing started. So eventually we got that money raised, we got the bank open, and it was actually coincidentally January 12th of 2009, which was it's the same day that we opened this bank in 2022, January 12th of 2022. Wow. So we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary. Also my youngest daughter's birthday too. So I always, I can remember that very easily. But we got that bank open, and once we got open, it was a big success, because at that time, if you think back to 2009, we had nothing but money to lend.
Right.
And most banks were not lending. I can remember it was a weird time. That was the first question that somebody would say is, "Are you lending?" Can you imagine anybody saying that, recently? I mean, so that was a great a great run for us. We got that bank up and running, and we ended up selling it in 2014 to Centennial Bank.
Oh,
And
so that's not that far away though. That's a pretty fast turnaround. That's pretty good.
it was, yeah. So we sold that, and then I stayed on with Centennial for a year, and then I wanted to do another bank, and so I had an investor out of the Orlando area, very wealthy guy who we were trying to buy a bank and then really convert it. And during the process, it was interesting because another banker that I know who coincidentally had also started a bank in 2009, a month after we did. So his was the last bank that started in the state of Florida, which was at that time, February 2009. Oh, wow. And so his name was Ken LaRoe, and he had a bank called First Green Bank up in Orlando. And so as I was talking with Ed Haddock about buying this other, putting together this other bank deal, Ken reached out and he said he knew Ed Haddock knew me, of course, and said, why don't we combine? You guys have additional capital, come in and let's grow this bank in First Green in South Florida. And, we'll combine forces. So at that time, that's what we did. We did a change of control with First Green. I became CEO, and we really opened up the South Florida market to First Green. And that was a big success. And we grew that bank up to almost $1 billion.
Wow.
And then we sold that in 2018, October 2018, to Seacoast Bank.
Okay.
So those have been the last two banks that I was CEO of. And then I had a 2-year non-compete. Okay. During that time, I was couldn't work, obviously, but that was when COVID occurred. And I was getting phone calls because of this PPP program that they came out with, getting phone calls from all these people that we had done business with before saying, hey, we can't get money.
Can you help us?
Can you help us? Yeah. And obviously the banks were overwhelmed. And really what that was to me was kind of a wake-up call about what was going on in our community, which was, I took a look because traditionally, community banks have been the lenders to the local small, medium-sized businesses. So I went and I took a look at the market. So it's Broward County, which is where Fort Lauderdale is located. And I found out that there were, in 2015, 11 banks headquartered in Broward County, Florida. And those banks had approximately $11-12 billion of assets. And so this is a pretty big market. So I think total deposits at that time were probably like 60 billion. So a good share. The big banks still dominated, but the community banks had, a decent share of the deposits. By 2020, there were only 3 banks headquartered in Broward County, and the total assets of those banks was about $500 million. So
did they
shrunk 90. They'd all been acquired and through consolidation. So in the Centennial and Seacoast, the same banks that bought our banks were acquiring these community banks and growing their presence. So that became, I was like, wow, I had no idea that had happened, So we went out to the business leaders here in the local community and really talked to them about what was going on and said, do you think we need another community bank here? And it was pretty overwhelming that yes, we do.
Absolutely.
And then it was, oh, by the way, will you
start one?
Yeah, will you start one? And I said, yes, I will, but will you put up capital?
Will you support?
Will you support it and put up capital and do business with that bank? So that was how we got started, and that was actually October 2020 was when my non-compete ended, and that's when we started on this project to open locality. And the other aspect, not to go on here on and on, but the other aspect we wanted to do another community bank, but we also wanted to differentiate that bank by being very tech savvy.
Yep.
And by, most community banks are not known as being real technology powerhouses.
No.
Usually the technology is subpar.
Mm-hmm.
So we want to have similar technology to that of the big banks, so that we could say to people, well, listen, if we can do everything they can do, why would you want to bank with a bank that, you're never going to be able to talk to the leadership, you don't know the real top people there,
Right.
They're in another state. We're right around the corner, and you can do everything with us.
Yep.
So it's, so far, we opened January 12th, as I said. We raised $38.5 million of capital from all local people.
Yep.
And we have grown to, well over $100 million in our first year in assets. So we're really happy with how that's going so far.
Very good.
We expect to break even this year on profitability.
Yep.
And, so it's been really just a lot of fun bringing on people. We just opened, I'm in our new world headquarters, as I call it.
Nice.
It's
Is that where you're located right now?
One location. Yeah.
Nice.
So, and it's very different in terms of, we made it really,
Yes,
I'll
please
show
do.
you. I know this is not going on the video.
No, it's not, but still, it's very.
It's a shared open workspace. So
Awesome.
it's kind of like a WeWork location. Yes. And we did that intentionally to really make a collaborative team building environment. Yep. And it's working out really well for us.
And people can't see it, but you're not wearing a suit and tie, which we're bankers, so I tell people all the time, they see me, and this is kind of how I dress now, which is a sweater. And I used to wear a 3-piece suit for 17 years, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine, but it's and sometimes that's needed. But for most of our customers, especially in the small business world, people want to see people like them. Right. So I think the world is changing, and folks like you and I are trying to change with them, I guess is the way I view the world. It's so interesting, Keith. I worked when I was in banking. I moved around a fair bit. So I'm originally from Canada. So I moved down into the US in 2001, and I worked for a couple banks there, CIBC and Scotiabank. They're very big banks.
Yeah.
And then came down here and worked for a variety of them. Bank of America, which every banker in the country's probably worked for. Every single banker I've talked to worked for Bank of America, Citizens Bank, and then worked for some not credit unions, small local community banks. Okay. And it's different when you have a big bank, because, and I used to tell my customers all the time, like, you've got to find what's more important, in my opinion. What's more important is to find the right banker, not the right bank.
Yeah.
Because the banker is the one that works for you, right? So really, you've taken that and used that and just created banks with the right bankers. And even in a world of in 2007, 2008, if you had the right banker fighting for you, you know, as a customer, you get stuff done. And whereas if you're, there's great people who work at Bank of America. I don't want to diss Bank of America. They're fantastic. And I ran their SBA 504 and real estate side. I didn't on the East Coast, and that was great. But when they have when they'll put out for a notice company wide to say we don't do this anymore, and all of a sudden the next day they don't do a whole piece of the pie. Whereas a small bank has flexibility in their thoughts, and it's not we don't ever do this. It's like, let's look at it. So there is a real need. I guess my point is, of the rambling here, there's a real need to have community banks. It's imperative. Otherwise, there's a big chunk of the small business world that does not get addressed.
That's our hypothesis, right? That is the need. That community banks are the ones who really foster those relationships with local companies, and we like to call them local companies because most local companies are small, medium-sized businesses, and small, medium-sized businesses is a mouthful. So just, the local companies, and the other thing is, who wants to be called a small business, right? Nobody. Even like, we don't like being called a small bank. We're like we're a local bank.
Yeah, I hated that. And then they changed to the SMEs, right? So it's but the reality is it's small as no one really understands small, even bankers. Small could be, I mean, from our point of view, a small business was 10 million and under in revenue for most banks. That is not a small business. If you hit $10 million in revenue, you're, relatively speaking, you're a big company,
Yeah.
right?
If you look at yourself on the curve, right? You're
Right.
you're not Microsoft, but you're not a one-man shop either, right? There's a ton of those out there. So
Exactly.
no, I think that's true. We found just really that is as you were saying, that is the niche that we fill here
Right.
in our market, and it's needed other places too. So that's
Absolutely.
our ultimate goal, is to be able to transport that and scale that, which is that's we're hoping to use technology, but also build personal relationships in other markets to be able to do that as we grow.
I think the merging of both of them is vital. I mean, it's funny, I've been a banker my whole career, but I struggle to go into any banks. I'd prefer to do everything online. So I haven't deposited a check in a bank in 20 years. And I've lined up in a bank twice in 10 years because I could do everything online.
Yeah.
So, but when the proverbial crap hits the fan, I want to talk to someone, and that's where the struggle comes, right? So, it's for the banks I have tended to use, and I personally have switched from big banks to smaller ones. I like to talk to someone when you need them, but I don't really always need them. So technology, the merging of the technology and the individual, I think is paramount, especially with the younger generation who are so integrated within technology. So I think it's really important. Yeah. So tell me a little, Keith. We got about 10 minutes left, but tell me about like what would be a lesson that you've learned in your career that you could pass on to someone who's new to business or entrepreneurship or even banking? What's like one of the most important lessons you've learned over the last couple decades?
For me, I have to say, without a doubt, that perseverance, uh, you know, just keeping going, right? Even when it looks like, because, had I not been able to get that first bank started back in 2009,
Yeah.
none of this would have ever happened.
Right.
And it would have been easy to just throw the towel in on that thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not. It would have been very unpleasant for me. Maybe that was the motivator, but I think it is just not quitting, moving forward. And what I've also found, Len, which sounds maybe a little corny, but I'm going to say it anyway. But there is a force in the universe, and I believe this because I experienced it.
Yeah.
And whether you're religious, not religious, it doesn't matter. But I don't know. I was raised a Catholic, so when all hell was breaking loose here, I went to church because in 2009, when we didn't have that money raised, because I was so desperate, I did not know what else to do except just pray and think positively and keep going. So I just think, for me personally, that experience just taught me so much about, and things happened as a result of that I can't, and I tell the story sometimes, like so we were like $3 million short or something. We ended up getting three investors for $1 million each that I had not known before.
Yeah.
And mysteriously enough, today, one of them is in jail for life.
Oh my goodness.
For having a Ponzi scheme, but they invested $1 million with us.
Wow.
Another guy I thought was completely broke. He would come to our investor meetings. I'm like, I thought he was going to invest like $5,000. I had no idea he had any money. He invested $1 million.
Yeah.
And he's passed away now.
Oh, wow.
And then one other guy who I didn't really know before and invested $1 million. And he was shot by the police in a police-assisted suicide. So it's like these people were brought to me and got us to that level. And then it was like they all had these kind of mysterious endings. So that was what got us to $12.5 million and got us open. And I think it was just from perseverance. So I say that, and then the other thing I would say is a sideline of that, because I've been in some things where, like I was a stockbroker at Merrill Lynch, right?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
I didn't stay there. I didn't persevere and keep going and try to make it there because I knew that wasn't for me.
Yep.
Right. So I
Right.
think it's a fine line. You also, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them type of
Absolutely.
mentality. And I've heard, like, I've read a few books along those lines that, one was written by a professional gambler, but it's really applies to business.
It's the truth.
You have to know when, sunk cost is a concept that we don't really relate to, but there are times when it's better for you to just move to something else. But
Absolutely.
It's really about how you feel inside, I think. Is this what you really want to do? Is this what you're really intended to do? And are you willing to give everything you have to it? And is it going to, and if you're successful, will it work out? And I think those are all questions that you have to ask yourself. And
that's wonderful. It's funny because people have asked that question to me, and my answer always is the same, but a different word. For me, it's persistence. And success comes to those who persevere, who persist. And that I think fundamentally over all things, whether it's intelligence, whether it's like I grew up really poor, like extremely poor. It's not really where you come from. It's not really how intelligent you are. It's not really who you have around you. If you can stick with it, and if you're passionate about it, so at that point it is great. But if you can stick with it and keep doing the things you need to do, success finds a way to you. And I love it. I think it's fantastic, Keith, and it gives me like sort of goosebumps because I've lived my life that way. And I see it all around me. The people there's so many wonderful people who have great ideas, but they don't stick it out. It's like, if you just walked a mile longer and there's a door there ready to be open that's going to bring in and they stop before they get there.
Right.
I mean, you've probably seen that time and time again,
Yeah.
right?
And really persistence and perseverance, they're really the same thing, right? I mean, it's
Same thing.
so yeah, that you say that is the same thing. And yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, we all know a lot of talented people that never really got anywhere in life, or people who just, never really, who had everything available to them and didn't take advantage of it. So
It didn't take that. And one thing I'd like to tell people as well is it's not that the people who have grit or perseverance or persistence are always positive. Man, there are days I wake up, even with this company, and go, wow, this is tough. Should I keep doing it? And the whole idea of perseverance and persistence is to fight that, right? Is to say yes. And it's not every day you wake up in a positive mood and this is going to be great. Yeah. Oh yeah, we just lost 3 people and we just lost 100 grand this month. Or it's fighting through that is really what it is. A lot of people just think it's going to be a clear, linear sort of path. It's never that, right? You're chocolate because you know the difference.
well, it's interesting you say that because, on my podcast, I interview all entrepreneurs, right? So who knows that better? And we see these people who are incredibly successful. I had one guy built a $1 billion+ revenue company. And, you look at this person, you think he's had it so easy his whole life. And it's like, when you dig into the stuff that these people have gone through, it's like, they just barely made it most of the times.
Yeah, they barely. Well, that's what we know as bankers, right? Because we see so many different companies. Most of the ones who have been successful have failed at some point, right? Because you just, but when people are perceiving others and their current success, a lot of people make the assumption they've always been successful or they've had a lot of help. But a lot of entrepreneurs, successful ones, have failed. And it's their ability to be able to get back up and move forward is really the trick. And how many people in your situation, Keith, in the first bank opening through the whole crisis in the financial world would have said, you know what? Let me go get a job. I'll go make my 6-figure job again, and I forget about this. No, most people would do that, but you didn't. You kept on going, right? Which is hard to do.
Well, and it's just, and I never look back. I mean, it's been so wonderful to think, because at this point I'm like 65, and I'm thinking, here I'm doing it again, and I'm thinking, if I was working at Bank of America right now, I wouldn't be working. I mean, they would have already shown me the door at like 62 or 60 or whatever. They would have said, you're out of here.
And you look like the same age as me. I'm 49. You look so if you were at Bank of America now, you'd look 65, not 50.
Oh, thanks. But I do take care of myself. But still, I mean, I can't imagine, because I like I would not want somebody showing me the door at 60. And I have a lot of buddies that are contemporaries of mine, who are, they've had successful careers. I mean, they've got money,
Right.
but they're not doing anything. And to me, that would not be satisfactory at this, at this point in my life. Certainly, I don't know, 10 years from now, I feel like right now, I want to still be working 10 years from now, but you never know.
You probably will, Keith. Because you're 65
I hope
and
so.
you started the bank. You're built differently.
I hope I am, because I really, and the thing is, if you really like what you're doing, it's not work, right? It's fun.
It's not, and we feed off, and I can't speak for you, but when I went to manufacturing, we sold that company in 2018. It was a small little company, grew it to 50 million, sold for 121 million. Now, I was a small shareholder. Jay, the owner, he's doing wonderful, and he's built other companies up. But I tried to retire for a year and a half. This was 5 years ago. Worst year and a half of my life. Then I started 3 companies because I'm like, I can't do this anymore. And I will never not want to work. And work meaning trying to build something, trying to help people. You might not want to go the pace you're going in 10 years time, but you're never going to sit idle. I don't think your brain will ever do that unless, something happens. But generally speaking, work is what, work is a bad word sometimes, but it's what makes us get up in the morning, right?
Yeah.
Do something. So.
Gives us purpose and, drive and everything good.
Yeah, everything good. Well, man, this has been great. We could probably talk for 3 hours, but I know you've got lots of interesting things to do today. But Keith, thank you very much for coming on. And if you ever need me, come on yours and talk about my companies. I'd love to do it at any time.
Yeah, I'm going to. So thank you first, Len, for having me on. And yes, I will get back to you on that, because we are, but we're probably not starting up again until February. We're just hiring a new marketing person, so we're getting that person on staff. But I would love to have you come on. Sounds like you got some great stories to tell.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it, pal.
All right. Thank you, Len. Bye-bye.